It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And this Wellness Wednesday comes from a discussion I had with somebody on Twitter. Someone on Twitter messaged and said, Wellness Wednesday, Leanna K's videos have done more for me than all the therapy I've done. I have questions. And so, I followed, we DM'd, and the questions were very, very interesting and really spoke to some of the struggles I had with therapy. And so I'm going to share not the details of things, but what the question was and sort of what the answer I gave was. If you like this sort of stuff, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. These are quality versus quantity videos. It's about helping people. So any financial support you can give for this, it's cheaper than therapy. So what the question was is basically people keep talking about moving on. And people keep talking about closure. What are these things? They couldn't conceive of them because they'd never experienced them. And so people kept saying, you need to move on. You need to get closure. You need to get to a place to move on. What does moving on mean? What does it mean? What does it feel like? How do I know when I'm there? Totally fair question if you've never experienced it. Now, everybody has experienced moving on, closure, with non-traumatic events. We know what it's like. Hey, that thing happened to me in the past. Funny story, right? I described it as it's moving data in your brain into storage instead of it being processed by the RAM in your brain. So it's something your brain is treating as past and filing it as such instead of those raw wounds, instead of those things your brain and body are still treating as relevant threats to you now. That is what it means. The process is different for different things. Sometimes the only thing that can allow you to move on is time. Now, that's not the same as closure. Sometimes you can never get true closure because somebody ghosted you or because there's things left unsaid. There's tricks and cheats, and some people will write it out, do this thing, talk to the wall, something like that. If that works for you, that's great. It doesn't work for everybody. Didn't necessarily work for me. If getting stuff off your chest is what's going to bring you closure, that's fairly easy to do. When closure comes from understanding what happened and the person or persons involved aren't there for you to talk to about it, that can be much more difficult. Your brain is constantly chewing on the why of it. And often the why is deceptively simple, but it's very difficult to get your brain to accept that it's as simple as somebody decided to be mean. Somebody decided to be cruel. Someone was an asshole. It wasn't you, it was them. It wasn't anything you did. The exact same series of events could happen with a totally different person. It would run totally differently. It's not a simulation. It's assholes. But that's really hard to believe because the brain is wired to protect you from getting eaten by tigers when a bush rustles, right? So the brain is designed to pick up on those inferred threats. If a bush rustles and, you see movement, you run away, you may feel a bit silly if it's a false alarm. But if you get that implied threat, the bush rustles, and you don't react, and it actually is a predator, you're lunch. That's the way the brain works, right? That's why negative experiences stick way harder than positive ones. And you do have to, my rule of thumb is 9 to 10 positives for every negative. That's what works for me. Your mileage may vary. In order to get that, you need a very supportive group of people around you. I would love to be able to figure out how to build those sorts of communities on a larger scale online. But sometimes that's what people need. They need those positive experiences multiple times to override the negative experiences. And then they get some closure. That's when they go, okay, it wasn't my fault. I didn't screw up. These people were just assholes, you know? Because otherwise someone stays in a height of it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. And there's nothing I can do about it. They're in a victimized state. They're traumatized. Their brain isn't shutting down the danger, warning. And people just get run down and they get sick and they get exhausted and their entire life suffers. Closure and moving on is designed to get you out of that cycle. Now, it's interesting to me that the entire therapy industry seems to treat moving on as something that people just intuitively understand. And it's really not. I think it's a really fair question to ask, what does moving on look like? And the way I described it to this person was that moving on is when you can think of something that used to cause you a lot of pain to think about. You can think about it without that pain. It dulls and dulls and dulls to the point that it's just like, well, that was something that happened. Usually you can chuckle about it like, wow, that was weird. That was crazy. I have a lot of these stories. And you build resilience by this process, figuring out what it is, how to do it. And so what happens when you're in the shit again, you can go, you've gotten through bad shit before, you'll get through bad shit again. Just give it time. Trust yourself, you'll get through it. Won't be ideal, but there is nothing to replace that but experience. And unfortunately, with the way the world is right now and the super interconnectedness of it, it's more difficult now to have something socially catastrophic happen, move on to a new group, and not have that thing dog you forever. And that's a really parasitic, socio-emotional phenomenon that we are gonna have to address. Like, somebody gets run out of one community, that community shouldn't hound them to the ends of the earth. It's possible they learned from it. It's possible they're not the same person. Leave them alone. They're gone. Don't hunt them. This is something that eventually I believe is going to become sort of a social norm. We're not there yet. Until that happens, it is very hard. Someone cannot move on when cyberbullying or gaslighting or cancellation isn't in the past. It's still going on. Every time someone tries to do something, some asshole brings up something they did 10 years ago and causes all these problems for them. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. We need to start creating communities where people are like, if it didn't happen in the last, set a guideline, right? Like, set a time limit, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, 6 months, whatever you're comfortable with. But if it didn't happen within that period of time, it's not relevant. You don't like it, don't talk to them, right? You don't like what they're about. We judge people by who they are now and in the recent past, not something they did 10 years ago. This seems like a fair and healthy rule for me. Obviously, there are things like if somebody, killed someone and the general consensus was they got away with it and they don't seem at all bothered by the fact that obviously exceptions for extreme situations apply, but that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a couple of bad tweets or a dumb video once that aren't really a summary of a person's character. People just tried to make them out to be that. I do think we need better community supports against that. That is something we can do. We can create communities. And I have had to do this. I have had people come to me with past transgressions from someone. And I looked into it, it's like, this is ancient history and it was all conjecture. There's a gray area here. I'm not prepared to be this person's judge, jury, and executioner. Now, fortunately, in my case, the people who brought it to me were good enough with me just looking at it, me explaining my decision making, and them going, if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. I just wanted to let you know. Whew. Okay, awesome. We're not always that lucky to have people who are that reasonable, but you have to try, right? It has to be the same rules for everybody. People are not the same people they were that long ago. And I do think, you don't have to give them the keys to the kingdom, right? You don't have to give them power to do unnecessary damage, but you can give them a chance. At the very least, have the conversation, have the introductory conversation of, there is this concern. Let's talk about it. But people don't want to do that because that's conflict. That's, I am uncomfortable. Resiliency comes from getting better at being uncomfortable. It is a skill. Being uncomfortable does not mean you shut down and you can't function. Being uncomfortable means my shoes hurt, but I'm going to take them off in 20 minutes, so I'll just tough it through, right? You shouldn't feel uncomfortable all the time, but you cannot expect to feel uncomfortable none of the time. If mere discomfort is this non-starter transgression, we can't have inclusion, because that means one group is going to have to bear all the discomfort so another group can feel no discomfort. That's not good. That's how people get hunted to the ends of the earth. So to recap, closure is taking, something that feels present to your brain and putting it past designation in your brain, taking it, out of RAM and into read memory, or if you like, taking it off your main hard drive and putting it into external storage, like putting it on a zip drive that you can recall it when you want, but it's not taking up space on your machine. Moving on is being able to recall that without intense pain. And we need to be able to create online communities where people can do that, not have past mistakes be ongoing, current, and present misery because people won't let it go. Interested in your comments. I expect this to be not well viewed right away because of E3, but still, I'm sure it'll help some people. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.